Welcome, this is Christy Brown. I'm the librarian at Summit Lakes Middle School in Lee Summit, and today I'd like to share with you about the diversity audit that some of the Lee Summit librarians recently conducted. I'd like to give a shout out to Allison Donahue, Amy Hoff, Tracy Mattis, Michelle Overbeck, and Amy Taylor, who were very involved in this process with me, as well as Laura Maxwell, our library coordinator. We did our audit using Destiny software, but I feel that if you do not have Destiny software, that you could easily adapt this to your software as well. And I hope that our process serves to be helpful to you. Our first task was to determine what we would be auditing. And so we started with the subgroups for the populations in our schools and added LGBTQ, neurodiverse, and physical disability and illness. Around the time that we were making this decision, SLJ published the article, Can Diverse Books Save Us? And within that article there was a chart that asked which of the authentic character portrayals are in demand and which are hard to find. And I've gone ahead and listed those out on the right hand side to make it a little bit easier for you to read. So we felt in looking at this list that our list pretty well paralleled that and included everything that we felt would be encompassing of our community of readers. So then our next task was to figure out how we would locate books in our collection that met each of those categories. And we thought we would start with tags. So I am sharing a document with you that will share tags that we were able to find for those areas. And it is a bit due. It ends in diversity_tags, and the QR code works as well. Sometimes we had to have some discussion and resort to our research skills, for example with neurodiverse and physical disability. In some cases it felt a little bit unsure for us which area it fell into. So you may see it a little bit differently than we do and may want to move some of these around. In other cases, when it came to our subgroups, there weren't a lot of tags. You'll notice that when you look at the black area. So what we did is we started searching for authors who we know predominantly wrote in those areas. For example, for black, we would look for Jason Reynolds, Sharon Draper, Kwame Alexander. Surprisingly, some of their books don't have the tag that you would feel would be associated for those populations. So hopefully this resource will help you out in finding some tags that maybe you hadn't thought about. And again, that bit due ends in diversity_tags. So once we decided what we were going to be auditing, what our categories would be, then we had to figure out how to make that happen. And we knew that some other districts had been using resource lists as a way to make that happen, but it sounded like a lot of people were working building by building. And so we looked for a way that we could try to make this a more collaborative effort, and we figured out a way to do district resource list. So what we're going to share with you can certainly benefit school districts that are smaller, but I think that it will especially benefit those that are larger like ours. We have 3 high schools, 3 middle schools, 19 elementary schools, and an early childhood center. But I wouldn't shut me off if you're a smaller school district, because if you haven't started a diversity audit, I think that what we've done can certainly help you. And if you don't use Destiny, I think that what we've done could probably be adapted to your own software as well. So we decided that our small team, the team of the 2 high school librarians, 1 middle school librarian, and 3 elementary school librarians, would undertake building district resource lists, and that we would have a naming category protocol that you can see listed here. So any resource list that we would begin would start with the number 0, so that would put the resource list at the top of any resource list that you have. Then we would use the category, whether we were building an elementary, middle school, or high school, to signify that. So for all the ones that I built, I did MS for middle school, and then a dot, and then the category would be the category name. So if it was for our Hispanic collection, I put Hispanic. If it was for the LGBTQ collection, I put LGBTQIA+. And when I would pull books, I would be pulling books searching through the entire school district, because in Destiny we can search by all elementary schools or all middle schools or all high schools. And that way, as I'm adding to that list, I'm not only adding for my school, I'm adding for the other two schools as well. And in a sense, I'm saving a lot of work for everybody else, and there's other benefits that come from that too. So we went ahead and typed up some guidelines for that. We decided that these should definitely be private. Part of the reason is that we're listing the tags that go along with that, and we didn't want that to be uncomfortable for anyone who might see some of the tags that were listed there, because on some of them it might be a little bit more sensitive. And we decided too, after doing some initial building, that we were only going to audit our fiction books, our fiction collection, because as we started to pull in books for some of our demographic areas, it definitely got into, with history, some of the books that perhaps they're important to our collection, they're important to history, but we didn't know if those were the books that kids would just, yearn to read, and that was really reflective of what readers really want for their reading. So we thought for our starting point, we would just go with our fiction collection. We were afraid that some of that might skew our results and not really give us a good idea of what we have to offer for our population. We wanted to make sure that as we found tags, that we were putting that tag in the category, the description section, and that way we would all be able to see the tags, any of us that work in that area. And then we found a way that as we added books, we could do it a little bit faster. So I will show you that here in just a minute, but I'm kind of just talking through this so that you know. Again, all of this information, if you were able to go out to this link, is listed here for you, and hopefully as I go through this, it makes more and more sense all the time. So that's a little bit about how we started building our district resource list. Let's practice building a district resource list. So I am in Destiny right now, and on the left-hand side, I'm going to click Resource List. And while I'm here, I'll just go ahead and take a look. You can see the various lists that we have already built, starting out with that naming code that I mentioned, the 0, MS, and then our various areas, and the tags that we've added along the way. I will say with Hawaiian Pacific Islander, we have had some trouble finding tags, so if you come up with great tags, please send them our way. We would love to do that. If I click Show More, one thing that you can see is that I have shared these lists with Sarah Eckert and Tracy Baker, who are the other two middle school librarians in the district. So the only people in the district who can see these lists are Sarah and Tracy, and that was one of the things that was real important. We wanted to keep these lists private because of the tags, especially when we get down to neurodiverse and the physical disability and illness. It's not that it's any kind of secret, we just wanted to make sure that it didn't become uncomfortable for anyone. So when you are ready to create your own resource list, you just simply click on Add List, and then you put in your name. And again, I do recommend putting that 0 in there because it puts your list at the top. And I will go ahead and pretend like I'm making an LGBTQ list. And again, you don't want it public in any way, so leave these blank. And then this is the area, the description area, where you can start putting in those tags. And for today, I'm just going to go ahead and put in just a few tags just to get us started. You can come back and add more tags at any time. Add co-owners. This is where I would search for the other librarians that I want added. I would have to unclick Only My Patrons since they are at other sites. I'm not going to show you that feature right now because if I do search for them, it will pop up student names, and so to keep our students confidential, I just won't show you that. But once you find them, then it's pretty easy to add them, and then they will be able to see this list as well. So you hit save, and now you can see that I have a new middle school list. So when I'm ready to add to that, I go out to do a library search. One of the most important steps, cannot stress this enough, is that on my location, I want to change this from my school to middle school. So I mentioned earlier that we could search by elementary, middle, or high school. And since we are trying to divide and conquer, I want to make sure that I'm searching all of the schools. So that's when I go ahead and type in one of the tags. I'm going to go ahead and try the tag lesbian. So it brings up a variety of books. Whenever you find the perfect tag, eventually you will be able to click this Add Page button. But I don't want to do that yet because right now it's just pulling up anything with that keyword lesbian. So I want to go ahead and click into one of my books that I believe might have that tag. And as I scroll down, I'm looking for lesbians fiction. And we decided to only do our fiction collection, so that's why I want to go ahead and grab this lesbians fiction instead of just lesbians. So when I click that, I now know that all of these titles that came up have the tag lesbians fiction. So at this point, I want to check two things. I want to make sure that I'm sitting on the selected list is indeed the one that I'm working on. That looks good. And at this point, if I add page, notice that it now moves all of these books into this list. So I currently have 14 titles added to my list. So just to kind of look at that, if I go back and I type in lesbian again, when I scroll through, you'll see that not every title was added. These we can see are not added because they are nonfiction books. As I mentioned, we are only doing our fiction collection. We started by doing both our fiction and nonfiction, and as we started adding books and realized the history of some of these subgroups, that it was going to really skew our results. We were going to have what looked like a pretty wide collection, and we knew that some of the nonfiction books that were being added hit the historical, although it's important to our history and it's important for curriculum, that it wouldn't be the type of reading that our students would be flocking to read. And so we thought for our audit that we would start with just our fiction collection, what students would be going to on their everyday go-to places for reading. And eventually we may add in some of this because there are some books that students really do enjoy reading. It is always important to go ahead and take a look because sometimes items do get missed. For example, notice the Pants Project, a fiction book. So I want to go ahead and click into that and see why it got missed. And as I scroll down, I see that Lesbian Mothers is probably why it was pulled up, and we have Lesbian Mothers fiction. So I can go ahead and click that, and it brought me two books. So I can add that page. So I now have a new tag that I can add to my list. But I saw something else while I was in the Pants Project. So you really do want to take some time as you're first building these lists, getting started, and look for things. I noticed that it said transgender people fiction as well, which would be another great tag. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And now I have more titles that I can add. So I go ahead and add that page. And as I was working on this, I just kept a notepad next to me and I kept track of those additional tags that I was coming up with. But just to show you what we would do, you would go ahead and go back to your resource list. And you would click into this list, the edit. And once you've kept that list of tags that you're finding, you could go ahead and then add those tags that you found. And I always like to keep mine in alphabetical order, but you can do it however you like. And why is that important to keep adding those tags? Well, you're going to need to update these lists from time to time. We're encouraging our librarians as they purchase books to try to make sure that they update these into the appropriate resource list. But we know that just like doing inventory, probably once a year, we will need to go through all of the tags to see if there are any books that we've missed. So having this list, comprehensive list of tags, will be very helpful to us so that in the future we can go through and check all of the tags to see if there's anything that we've missed. So I can just hit save here. And that's how I would go about building a district resource list. One of the nice things about this is that it is building a list that both Tracy and Sarah can see as well. And it's including books from all across the district. I can see something off-site that I don't own, which will give me some ideas of items that I might need to purchase for my library. So I think that there's a lot of benefits here in building these district resource lists. Ultimately, your goal in doing a diversity audit is to figure out if your collection is meeting the needs of your students. So we decided to chart our findings on something like this. And so we looked at the percent of students that fall into each of the categories, and then our goal would be to make the percent of books in the fiction collection match that percent of students in the population. Obviously, with LGBTQ, neurodiverse, and physical disability and illness, it's probably going to be impossible to track the number of students, the percent of students. I did talk with our counselors to see if there might be any way we could get an approximate number for neurodiverse and physical disability and illness, but we weren't able to come up with any way to do that. So at least tracking the percent of the fiction collection gives us an idea of what we are offering, and we can try to come up with a reasonable percentage that we would like to achieve as it kind of compares with the others. So for example, I have about 10% Black students in my population. My goal then would be to have about 10% of the books in my collection, my fiction collection, feature Black characters. I'm going to share another resource with you, and this bit due ends in diversity_audit. There's a new QR code here, and this will kind of walk you through the steps to help you get the data to put into those charts. So these are the results of my Summit Lakes audit. Again, I mentioned that I have about 10% Black students, and currently I'm sitting at almost 6% of the books in my fiction collection. So in all of the areas I have some room for growth, and in these three areas where I don't know the percentage, to me 1% seems a little bit low. It was interesting that these two are about the same percentage, and this will give me some ideas of ways that I can grow these collections. Interestingly enough, my numbers were pretty darn close to Pleasantly and Bernard Campbell's numbers, the other two middle schools. So that's one nice thing about having a larger district, where we can compare our numbers and we can see that across the district we have some equity. One thing I'd like to point out too is I currently have no students identified in the Hawaiian Pacific Islander and the Native American categories. However, I would still like to grow my collection in those areas. And I did mention earlier I'm having a hard time identifying which books would fall into the Hawaiian Pacific Islander category. So if you have any great ideas, please send them my way. And then once again, that resource that you're going to want to get these numbers is BitDo diversity_audit. So the last handout that I referenced, the BitDo that leads out to the diversity audit, this is the handout, and it pretty well walks you through everything that you need to do this process. The demographics here that I talked about, making sure that you find out your student population, then trying to figure out how many total copies are in your fiction collection. We ran a Missouri report, and this walks you through how to do that. Some of our librarians had recently done a title-wise collection analysis through Tidal Wave, and we found that that collection analysis didn't seem to pull the same number of fiction copies as this Missouri report did. The Missouri report seemed to work a little better for us. So you can play around with that and see what seems to give you the best results. But if you are only analyzing your fiction collection as we are, then you want to figure out your total copies so that you can get those percentages to see how they match with your student population. Then you have your master district resource list that we talked about. And then finally, you'll want to do a collection analysis to determine what you personally have, because remember, the district resource list will have copies from all elementary schools or all middle schools or all high schools. This will be a way to pull just specifically what your building has. And there are two options for that. You can run a title and copy list report. The downfall of this report is it is a snapshot. It will only give you the results on the day that you do that. So you'll want to delete those after you run them, because then the next time you run the report, it'll be something new. Option 2 is you can create copy categories, which means that you'll have a little bit of maintaining to do, but that's the option that I chose because I like some of the extra benefits that it can give to me. To determine the number of copies in each of your resource lists, I mentioned that you'll need to either do the title and copy list report or create copy categories. So this part will show you how to do the title and copy list report. And again, in the most recent bit due that I shared with you, all of the steps are listed right here. So you have everything that you need to do. You don't need to worry about taking big notes if you have opened up this bit due. So I'm going out to Destiny right now, and I want to go into Reports, Library Reports, and I'm going to choose Title and Copy List. I will select by list, and then I want to choose one of my district resource lists. I'll choose one of these that starts with a 0. I'm going to choose the LGBTQ list that I know is the district resource list, not the one that I created today for the webinar, because it will be the most comprehensive list. I will show all copies. If you would like to see your circulation statistics, you can check this box, and then I will output it as a Microsoft Excel. I'll go ahead and run my report. Now, as you do this, it's only going to pull the copies that are in your library. Remember, that comprehensive list shows copies across the district, but this report will only grab the books that are part of your library. So I open that up, and as I scroll down, I'm going to see how many copies I have in my library. You can see that some of these titles are multiples. And I see 78 lines. I want to account for this one line that is the heading line. So I have 77 copies of LGBTQ books in my library, and that's what I would put into my chart. Then I would need to repeat this process for all of my other lists by going back here, hitting Library Reports, Title and Copy List, select by list, choosing one of my other lists, repeating that process until I have charted all of my copies for all of my lists. I mentioned that there were two ways to find your counts for your categories. One of those is the title and copy list report that we just practiced. The other is to create copy categories. And this is really for those of you that wish to share out your diversity list with your patrons. So I'm going to pop over into Destiny to show you what this looks like. I am currently not logged in because many of our users are not logged in when they first go into Destiny. Right here you can see Resource List. And this will be ultimately what we will be achieving as I walk you through this part of the video. Right here you can see resource lists that I have created that are specific to my site, Summit Lakes. So these are encompassing only the books that I have in my collection in these categories. I am also a genreified library, so I have included as well in this area the genres for my collection, and that's why I've numbered them 1 and 2. I was trying to group all my genres together, and then all the ones are the collections for the diversity audit. I recently shared this with my students, and they were very excited about having access to these lists. For those of you who have students who use Destiny Quest, it's the same thing. They're looking for a resource list right here. They will need to click on the public list. And then same thing, you can see those very same lists appearing here. They can click into any of those lists and they'll see all the books in your collection that fall into those categories. Now, unfortunately, you cannot create a resource list from a resource list. Remember, we currently have district resource list. But what you can do is you can create copy categories from a resource list. And then from copy categories, you can create a resource list. So it's a roundabout way of getting there, but I do think for those of you who are wanting to share it out, there's a benefit. Some of you may be saying, well, why not just direct the students to the copy category tab? For two reasons. First of all, I think students have a hard time finding this tab over here. And secondly, in Destiny Quest, there's not an option for them to locate and see the copy categories, or at least I haven't found that option. Visual Library, you can set it up so that they can see either copy categories or resource list. But again, I find that students have a hard time finding this. So I'm just trying to keep everything simple by locating them to resource list here. And then again, when you click into Destiny Quest, resource list is what they're looking for there. So I'm going to go ahead and log in to show you how this works. So once you've built those district resource lists, you're going to add copy categories to your site. And so you can see here the copy categories that I've already built. I will go ahead and add in a practice one based on the work we've done today, LGBTQ. And I go ahead and make mine not restricted so that it's available to people. And I go ahead and hit save. And then as I scroll down, you'll see that I now have that category with 0 copies in it. Here's my other one that has 75 copies. I'm going to go ahead and hit the add to this category, the plus sign. And notice that I can select by list. So I want to select the district resource list, and I'm going to choose the one that I know has a lot of copies in it, not the one I started today. And I hit OK. And then just in a matter of clicks, it adds the 77 copies. You may recall from that title and copy list report that I ran earlier that we had 77 copies. So I would just repeat this process until I have copy categories for all of my areas. Notice that if anytime I want the counts for my copy categories to put into my chart, I can just look right here and it will give me those counts. I will point out that I have 77 here and 75 in my current one, so it looks like I have a little updating that needs to be done to this one. So I will go ahead and update that one right now, and I do that by hitting add to this category. I go back out to my district list and I say OK, and notice that it added 2 titles there. So every once in a while that is something that you'll need to do to update your list to see that you have everything current. So now when I scroll down, both of my lists have those 77 copies available in there. So let's say you created all of your copy categories and you want to create resource lists that are specific to your site. So you go to resource list, and you may recall this from earlier. You just simply hit add list and you choose the naming that seems appropriate to you. For me it was 1, and then I would type in that LGBTQ. And this time you do want to make the list public locally, which means that only your patrons will see it. I would not recommend making it public across the district because then every site would see it. If you want to type in any kind of a description, you're welcome to do that. Perhaps something like great books about or featuring LGBTQ characters. You can go ahead and hit save. And as you scroll down, you can see I now have this. I'm going to go back up here to Library Search and to Copy Categories. I'm going to click into this LGBTQ because I know this is the one. Well, actually I could do either one since I've updated them both. I'm going to go ahead and click View. And then what I want to make sure is that my selected list is the one that I just created, or if I'm updating it, I can always at any time choose it here. But since this is the one that, this is my site because it's a 1 and I've just created it, and you'll see that none of these copies seem to be added into that list. So I go ahead and hit Show All, and then when I add the page, now all of those appear in that list. So I have just created a resource list for my site. And if I were to log out and see it the way that the students see it, and if I go to Resource List, I now have an LGBTQ that I've just created, and if I view that, the students would be able to see all of the books in my library that fall into this category. I hope our process has helped you, given you some helpful tools and tips for how you might do a diversity audit or how you might improve upon the process that you have been using. Some of the pros for us were that this was a collaborative effort. We have 19 elementary schools, 1 early childhood, 3 high schools, and 3 middle schools. And the district resource lists were initially built by our team of 6. So that was pretty exciting that we could do all of that work and then share that out with our librarians. And then the maintaining of the list, we will share that work with all of the district's librarians at this point. So I think maintaining the list will be pretty easy. The building of the list, even though it took us a little bit of time, I wouldn't say that it was overwhelming. District equity, when we were able to chart how we're doing in all of our buildings, it was kind of nice to see across the board areas where we are similar and then areas where we are different. So getting that overall snapshot of where we are. Title count and copy count, one thing that I did not stress in the video, but perhaps you saw it, is anytime you click into a resource list, you can also see on Destiny the title count in the upper left-hand corner. So although we were collecting by number of copies, if you would like to check your number of titles, you can do that as well. So here's how it shook out for Summit Lakes, and you can see my percentages are pretty similar, which is good to know. But I did notice on some of the that it was good information, because for Asian, where I have 146 copies, I only have 87 titles. So the variety of what I have available is something that I want to keep in mind too. Likewise with my multiracial, which is already kind of small, 43, I only have 28 titles. So that is a good indicator for me of something that I might want to work on. Some of the cons, this does not account for own voice, and we did know this going into it. We decided we have to start somewhere. So hopefully own voice is something we will be able to account for in the near future. And then missing tags. We are at the mercy of what Destiny gives us. So like I mentioned with the authors, sometimes we started looking for authors that we know write in some of these different categories. And then I think that just being mindful as we are out handling the books, whether that be through inventory, shelving, weeding, whatever means it takes. I was shelving books the other day. I was actually out there weeding, and I saw a book that featured a Native American character, and there was a sequel to that, and I thought, I do not think that this is in our resource list, and sure enough, when I looked, it was not. So having that heightened awareness of checking to make sure that these lists are as up to date as possible. So thank you again for joining me today, and I wish you the very best with your diversity audits.